I'm Megan.
And I'm Michelle.
And today we're going to talk about the weighted funding formula. Where do we start, Michelle?
So this whole thing started back in 2013 when legislators realized that we have a lot of English language learners in Nevada. And it's probably going to take more resources to get them up to speed with their other peers. And so we need to invest more in them. So they created a program called Zoom Schools. And what Zoom Schools does is it gives extra money to schools that have a high percentage of English language learners. And they can use that money to extend their school year a few days, or implement a pre-K program, or build a reading center. All these things meant to add that additional support.
So what happened after that?
So it kept growing. In 2015, Governor Sandoval's budget called for more Zoom schools, but he also created some additional programs that were targeted towards other types of students that might be struggling, such as students in poverty. So he created a Victory Schools program that was very similar to Zoom Schools. Mm-hmm. He added extra money for special education, and he added extra money for students that are gifted and talented.
And was the goal always just to stay with those categories, or were we supposed to end up somewhere different?
Well, the goal has always been to try to attach the funding itself to the student and not necessarily to their school. So let's just say you're an English language learner. You get lucky and you get in a Zoom school, and so you get those resources you need. But what if you're not in the Zoom school and you're in a school that just doesn't have a lot of English language learners, so you don't get the extra funding? But if you're just a student that English is your first language, you're in a Zoom school and you get those extra resources when you don't necessarily need them. So the goal has always been to kind of fix that situation and make sure all students, regardless of which school they're in, are getting the additional resources they might need.
Right. So now there's a bill this legislative session, SB 178, put forward by Democratic Senator Mo Dennis, that would basically implement those weights sooner than that original time frame, right?
So tell us what a weight is.
Okay. So a weight basically changes, it's basically a fancy word for a multiplier, and it changes the amount of money that a school gets for different types of students. So to explain how that works using some numbers, let's say, just for example, that each school receives $5,000 for just regular pupils, no special, no English language programs, no, special education status, nothing like that. So let's go off of the average number of 5,000 that schools are receiving to educate just regular students. So what the weights would do under SB 178 is change the amount that schools receive for special types of students. So there'd be a 1.5 multiplier for English language students and for so-called at-risk students.
Which are students in poverty.
Right, and that's calculated based off of the number of students receiving free and reduced lunches. So going off of that $5,000 number, a 1.5 multiplier would change that to $7,500. So the school would receive $7,500 for those students. So turning to special education, the weight under this bill would be 2.0. So it would be double the amount of funding that a school would receive for just a regular student. So your $5,000 suddenly becomes $10,000 received for that student. Now, one of the important things to note about the bill is while the special education weight would go into effect immediately, the 1.5 weight would actually be ramped up over a period of several years. So it would start off at 1.05 in the 17-18 school year. It'd be 1.15 in the 18-19 school year, 1.3 in 19-20, and then 1.5 after that. So it would gradually ramp up to that 1.5 number.
Now, Nevada is already planning to move, as Megan said, to having special ed students be on this weighted formula.
Right.
Now, the problem, as with everything, is money.
Of course.
So what we've got going here is that they're saying that this is going to cost more than $1 billion to implement.
And the reason for that is because you can take this money and shift it around, but you're still working with the same pie of money. So if you think about this pot of money that schools are pulling from as a pie, the weights are just reallocating how that money is going to different schools. But the problem is that if you don't increase the size of the pie, some schools are going to actually end up with less funding than they have now.
Because they have fewer at-risk students that are going to have a higher payout.
Fewer special ed students, fewer English learner students, and fewer at-risk students who are on free and reduced lunches.
And these districts do not want their funding to go down.
Of course.
So they're asking, why don't we just raise the amount of funding?
But the problem with that is that funding isn't in the budget right now. The governor has called for certain increases to funds to fund these types of programs, like we were talking about with Zoom and Victory Schools. The governor's called for $42 million to fund Zoom schools, $30 million for Victory Schools, another $30 million for special education students, and then $5 million for gifted and talented students.
So you add that all up, and it's $107 more this biennium than there was last biennium.
Yep.
But that's still not the $1 billion that they need to put this in place.
Yeah, $107 million falls way short of that $1 billion projection. And of course, that's subject to change, and everyone's kind of guesstimating on how that might play out within their schools, so it's not a set number. But there's sort of a significant gap there between $107 million and $1 billion. So that's where we're at now.
Yeah, so I think the goal, everyone seems to be behind the idea of a weighted funding formula. It's a good concept, they think. But it's just going to be a matter of time before we're able to find funding for that.
Exactly. And that could happen sooner, and it could happen later, and we just don't know. So I think we're just going to have to wait to see on that one.
We'll have to wait and see.
All right.
Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Indy Video.
Yeah, Indy Explains.